Hi, everyone. Welcome. Excited to see you. Um, Thank you for attending. We're going to give it a couple minutes as kind of the conversion as the attendees move from the waiting room into the presentation. Good to see you all. While we're waiting, if you want to drop into the chat where you're calling in from, we're excited to see you. I'm calling in myself from
Hello.
Minneapolis. Kate, where are you today?
I'm in northern Michigan, actually, at Mackinac Island, if anyone
Oh,
knows where Mackinac Island is.
she's like in one of the best places ever. Yeah,
I
we're
know.
representing the Midwest today too. It's kind of fun.
I know it's great. I'm happy it's old home week for me being up here.
Oh, it's awesome. It's probably beautiful weather up there.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It is bright blue skies and cool weather in the morning, and then in the afternoon it gets just warm enough where you sort of drape your sweater across your shoulders, and then in the evening it gets cold again. So it's a great mix during the day. No one's too hot, and it's not too difficult to be walking around and stuff. It's great.
Oh, nice. You have a little tray of Mackinac Island fudge next to you for like a
I
sugar rush.
do.
Nice.
I do, yes. And walking down the street at Mackinac Island with the fudge smells and the ice cream smells is just wonderful.
Oh, awesome. Seen so many familiar faces on the chat. Welcome. A lot of Minnesotans, which I always appreciate being a Minneapolis area native. Oh yeah, see someone from Michigan, Jennifer acknowledging
Hmm.
Mackinac. Good to see y'all. It's gorgeous in the Shenandoah Valley right now. Thanks, Elizabeth. I got Bemidji up north. Pick some blueberries. Well, we're going to give it one more minute. I think we've got a few more. I'm still seeing a little bit of a count stream in. All right. I suppose we're at that time. We could probably get started. I think it's down to a trickle here, but thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to see you. It's like my favorite day of the year. It's like Christmas and fundraising. It's the Giving USA Day when all the data comes out. And um, I just think it's so exciting. I get to be here with you. It's the first joint webinar between BWF Zuri, our recent merger this month, which we're super excited about. We're like, the excitement is just so palpable with anyone you meet from BWF Surrey. So we're really excited about this. I'm excited to be joined by Kate, someone who I've gotten to know more in the last few weeks than I have in the years before, and found out we're kind of like the same people.
We are.
Always living in the future of fundraising, like all like just soaking it all in, and we're really excited to share this time with you. I'm going to just start out by whoop, if I can get my mouse to work, just introducing ourselves. First of all, I'm Josh Birkholz. I'm now the Senior Fellow of Philanthropy Innovation, which means I get to live in this stuff all the time. My absolute favorite things, the future of fundraising, um, Giving USA specifically. I've been on the board of Giving USA. I was trying to calculate back, I think since 2013, I've been involved. Leading the advisory council on methodology for nearly a decade, being on the executive path, being a former chair of the board, now immediate past president, and moving into co-chairing global philanthropy. I just love looking at the statistics, kind of where the whole industry is going. The macroeconomics of it just super fuel me, and I think it fuels Kate too. Kate, why don't you introduce yourself?
Very, very happy to. I'm Kate Nimety, everybody. I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategy for BWF Zuri, and I am overjoyed to be here. It has never happened that Josh has let someone do this work with him for Giving USA, and I'm so honored and I'm so excited to be here with you all. We have a lot in store for us. This conversation is going to go here, there, and everywhere, and so we're really looking forward to presenting it together.
Yeah, and I put the QR codes up here because we often have QR codes for our personal link-ins at the end. And I know some of you, as soon as that Q&A starts, you're like, I got other things I want to do. I'm then sit through Q&As, and you won't get to see our amazing LinkedIn profiles. So go in there. If you wouldn't mind going in and following BWF Zuri, since both of us had separate LinkedIn, now we're together, it might be a great opportunity to follow where all the new thought leadership coming out of our group is going to come from. So I'll leave it on for one more second if you're scanning. Otherwise, we're pretty easy to find. I would encourage you to follow us to get the latest. And let me see, just some high level housekeeping. Thanks for practicing with the chat, showing us all where you're from. We'll probably have to turn the chat off coming up, or it'll keep popping up while we're speaking. So we're going to really ask if you have questions to use the little Q&A. It should be easy to find. If not, it might be under your More button. Ask your questions there. We're going to try to track them as we're going and hopefully answer some. And if we don't, we'll send an email and try to answer your questions later. Also, know that you'll get a recording of this. I know that's one of the most common questions. So, right up front, yes, these will be recorded. We will send these out to you following the session. Before we get into the Giving USA and the data and kind of the economics and implications for fundraising, Kate, do you want to talk about who we are a little bit?
I am so excited to, as Josh was saying at the top, we are all really, really incredibly excited about what BWF Zuri is now. We want to introduce you to our new selves. We've been at this for over a year, talking about how we can merge our capabilities and become one united BWF Zuri. Josh and I are both here representing the entire enterprise. Again, I'm very honored to be here. We have 170 plus members of the team now, which is incredible. And we serve over 400 clients. And so we're here representing the entire end to end space in advancement, which is also unheard of in the sector. We're the first ones to do absolutely everything end to end for advancement. That includes your campaign all the way through the technology enablement. And we do that throughout the entire nonprofit center. So we're not just focused on one part, one vertical. We're also focused on the entire nonprofit entity, our entire industry. We have specialty areas, as you know. Those of you who know BWF, it's the same BWF folks. Those of you who know Zuri, it's the same Zuri folks. We're just united in our effort together. And if we flip to the next slide, we can talk about each of those specialty areas in detail.
Operator error. There we go.
Oh, no, it's fine. What does end to end mean? So we are end to end advancement, support, and strategy. And that is, we're looking at the campaigns, the fundraising strategy, just as we always have. We're looking at engagement, donor experience, annual giving, just as we always have. Fundraising operations, soup to nuts. What does it mean to operate your fundraising at your own organization and the differences from one organization to another? And then, of course, technology implementation and optimization. So we're looking at all of the different aspects of managing an enterprise on your side with our team that now includes an exponentially larger bench too. We're focused on the donor journey. It's very important to us that the donor and the engagement journey are the core of how we're functioning. We want to make sure that we're always thinking about the recipients of the work that you all do and the missions that you all are supporting. And so with that, we're here to be able to offer you a bespoke methodology, a bespoke support system that will actually get you from A to Z all throughout your whole fundraising operation. It's very, very exciting for us. We've been working on this for a long time. And we're hoping that you are sharing our excitement. So without further ado, we can get into the primary content. Josh, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate. This was quite a year, 2025. So again, the Giving USA data comes out in the summer following that's when we've kind of finalized the year-end numbers from the year before. So we're digging into what happened in 2025, what happened in the economy to lead into what are the giving trends that we saw, and then kind of go into industry trends alongside of that. And I wanted to give a little bit of context. A lot of us remember 2025 because we were presumably all there for it. And it was one that really started out the year with a lot of changes, kind of disruption. Early 2025, the biggest stories were government support changes. There was definitely a strain on the sector. We probably heard it the most initially around USAID. So those of you in especially in international global relief and development and international affairs probably saw this the most. Real disruption of USAID funding, projects that were maybe partially funded through private support as well as government support. Certainly in higher education and in healthcare, the NIH funding Um, uh, Challenges were really prominent in the beginning of 2025. We had a lot of organizations were in staffing freezes, and I remember meeting early in the year with actually throughout the year with leaders in higher education, and everyone's like, it's really tough right now, but oddly, we're having a record year, but it's tough for everybody else. Then I talked to the next one, like, oh, it's so tough right now, but we're actually having a record year, but I know it's hard for everybody else. So that was like the story. We actually saw probably about, I think it was pushing 80% of our clients at a survey we had in January of this year on the year before had an up year last year. So there was challenges, especially in the first part of the year, first and second quarters, first quarter more dominated by the changes in government support. Second quarter was more dominated by what do we call it? Liberation Day, the tariffs that were announced, and there was super disruptive effect on the sectors. And this was just looking from a Yahoo Finance. They do the nice sector breakdowns. In April 7th, you can see every sector was down. Some really down, like consumer cyclical and technology and so forth. Go forward to actually, I think this might actually have been December 31st. I'm seeing my first typo, which shows how human I am and it's not built by AI. Is that this was December 31st. Look at those same kind of went the other direction. So technology being up 20% on the year, it's actually was from a down point of down 22 in April. So that was a 43% climb from April through December. Or you can see similar in there was a few other basic materials was one that had a very similar climb, nearly a 40% climb. So it was I'd say market shock followed by market acceptance. Maybe acceptance is too strong, but at least equilibrium that, okay, we can buy stocks again. And so it ended up being a strong year for the market. I mean, S&P 500, 16, 17% on the year. Earnings growth, estimated 12 to 14%, revenue, record highs across all the major indices. Interest rates moved from over 7%. They went down a little bit in flux in 2026, but 2025, really across the asset markets, the indicators were really positive. And as we've seen giving shift more and more towards the high net worth, asset markets are more predictive of the giving trends. In fact, at January, I predicted we'd be at six something billion, probably in the teens, for what this year would be based on the econometric models. Now, the everyday donor, they follow different things, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the reality is, it's super cliched to put a K-shaped graph on, but I don't know how I can't when I'm talking about 2025. The reality is, and it continues to this day, the affluent Americans are getting ahead. Low income, low asset households have been falling behind. So much so that roughly half of all spending in the United States is done by the top 10% of earners. And that's actually at 52% global. It's not just a US phenomenon. We're seeing more of a K-shaped economy globally. And that's it kind of says a lot because a lot of other industries are like, okay, we need to change. And so they have, and a lot of them are adapting. I'm sure you've seen stories about airlines selling out the first class before the main cabin and adding more seats. I think Delta just added a new plane that has like 40 first class seats or something, because they're making money on that. Hotels are like, we need more penthouses, more suites, because those are selling out high-end accommodations. Luxury retail is outperforming the sector. Like you're seeing like a resurgence in like luxury watches and Tiffany's, they're all doing quite well. Now we can have opinions about that, but we have to recognize that the industries outside of fundraising are like, okay, we have to adapt to there's money flowing in the affluent community. And really for many decades, we've seen that trend in fundraising as well. Now the downside is that consumer sentiment is at record lows. Now, consumer sentiment is a measure that looks at all consumer behavior, not just the wealthy. And it's actually at a record low right now, approaching it in 2026, and it was really pretty low in 2025. So the declines, I guess that maybe is confusing. The declines are increasing. They're declining more, is what I mean to say. It's a consumer sentiment. So much so that the top 10% of earners are also declining. They're also saying, I'm less confident in my spending. Now, that could be a little bit spurious, like to say, oh, the affluent are now getting uncomfortable. Actually, the top 1% are probably still fine. It's the other nine. So it keeps moving up closer to the very wealthy are still doing fine. And who's feeling less comfortable keeps climbing up. It's a smaller and smaller narrow field. But the uncertain economy is a huge headwind to everyday giving. And we've seen, especially pronounced since the 2008 Great Recession, the decline in donor counts. Again, the Given USA data does not track donor counts, but other like the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, the panel studies at IU and others have showed that that is a continuing trend. Consumer sentiment, discomfort by the everyday person in their spending. Can I afford gas or groceries, or should I take from my extra money and give to charity? Well, there is no extra money, and so we're seeing more and more that the charitable landscape is being driven by the economics of the affluent. So with that, okay, that's the setting. I feel like I'm giving you the obvious stuff. We all lived through 2025, but markets were up, assets are strong, consumer sentiment's down, the everyday person is struggling, where the affluent is still giving strong. So what is Giving USA anyways? I think many of you are familiar, those in the industry. It feels like it's been around a long time, but I want to bring it back. It actually started in 1956. There was a then association called the American Association of Fundraising Council, which is like it was like the professional association of all the consulting firms. It rebranded itself as the Giving Institute, and so the Giving Institute is the parent association. Giving USA is the charitable arm, the way that all the companies doing business with nonprofits are giving back to the nonprofits they serve. So it's the longest running annual report. Um, I, I have to say the first copy under the name Giving USA is in the Smithsonian. It was one of my personal privileges was I got to speak at the when it was put into the Smithsonian when Given USA was there. So I was super excited. I'm really close. This is dear to me. The way it comes about is firms like ours, other companies that you all know and trust, they donate and cover more than half the costs. The rest of the cost is covered through the subscriptions. And I think it's the best subscription really money can buy for data. It's like the almanac of giving. It's the almanac of fundraising. So if you want to know like what's happening and to have that reference through time, I don't think there's a better resource than Giving USA. So if your organization's not subscribed, this is my board hat. Or maybe it's a commercial. You should go subscribe. It's totally worth it. You get the special reports, the data tables, all the cool stuff. Like what else would you do on a weekend but read Giving USA data tables? I know that's what I'm doing. Um, well, yeah, okay. Moving on from that, I was starting to rethink my life at that moment, but I think I'm recovered. So let's talk about what happened with giving in the United States. So I gave this economic backdrop. When assets are up, usually the giving goes up. We often quote unquote pray for an early year disruption because when it's late year, it goes down. Back in 2021, we saw the stock market crash in the last quarter and giving went down. But when it goes down in the first quarter and recovers, giving usually goes up. And that was the case. 2025 was the record year for current giving, meaning we've never announced this high of a number in the year that it's come out, which is 617.2 billion was given in 2025. Now, in 2021, that number was lower, but inflation adjustment has moved that up. So in inflation adjusted terms, 2021 was the biggest year. And my apologies earlier when I said the fourth quarter disruption, that was 2020. 2021 was the record year following that. Now, 2025, 617 billion. I like to point out because when you see charts like this, it looks like the stock market, stocks are going up or they're going down. This is not like the value of the charitable landscape. This zeroes out every year. That means Americans gave another $617 billion in 2025. It started over. It's not like the value of their giving went up. So if you think about it, over a 2 year period, that's like $1.2 trillion. This starts over every year. Can you imagine a stock market like NVIDIA having to start over at zero and only count what the new stock purchases that year were? It's kind of remarkable when you think about that, when we think about how it's equivalent to more than 2% of our GDP, but it starts over at zero every year. I think that's super impressive. The ongoing generosity in this country and really seeing that globally, that generosity is a value we care about and it keeps going up. Now we saw the sources where giving comes from, and then Giving USA is since the beginning focused on individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations. Now, technically, a bequest is a gift from an individual after they've met certain actuarial realities, let's say. So it's still kind of individual. And foundations, a lot of people point out, at least half are probably family foundations with a single individual making that choice. Roughly about 80 to 85% of giving decisions are still made by an individual. But what's happening is they're giving in different ways through foundations, through DAFs, through bequests, through other mechanisms. Now, what we've seen in terms of the changes by giving sources is that just a change year over year, is that the bequests area had the biggest jump while all the areas had increases in current dollars. Technically, the corporations, it's pretty flat if you adjust for inflation, but it's still up after 5 years of record growth in the corporate sector.
Can I stop you right here real quick?
100%.
And just thinking about this data and the prior slide, are DAFs folded into the data that Giving USA is presenting on these two?
Thank you. Yes, DAFs are folded in, and there's sort of like a net out type of approach on it. But yes, if the individual gave to their DAF, that would show up as an individual giving, but it's netted out on the recipient side on where the gift goes to, so that they try really hard to not double count. The giving from foundations that came out of a DAF would also, it depends where that DAF is. So if that DAF is at a community foundation, it would show up in the foundation sector. So for the most part, they're there in this foundation space. It'll be a little more complicated when we see on the recipient side, because if a higher education holds a DAF, it'll show technically as a gift from education, which would be counted in the foundation. So it's a little bit confusing, but the DAFs are all included in here. And that's an important point because I believe DAFs are the amount coming out of DAFs is more than 10%. So, like, if we just calculated that as its own segment, it's actually more so. The giving to DAFs, I think, is larger than arts and culture and international affairs combined, just the amount of dollars going in to donor advised funds. Thank you for that question. So the individual giving outside of bequests and foundations grew modestly. In fact, we've seen, I'm going to go back and sorry, I'm getting everyone motion sick by me moving around the slides, but this number for individuals keeps getting lower. But I like to point out individuals making philanthropic decisions has not declined, but there are other factors. People give to GoFundMe and other places which are not registered charities. Giving USA tracks giving to 501c registered charities. So that would be outside of it. There's certainly generosity is probably still increasing, and the way the affluent give is more likely to be structured than the everyday person, which is why we see growth in foundation and a decline in individuals. And so as we move forward, the individual giving outside of bequests, it was really pretty modest as a percentage share. The declines in consumer sentiment definitely pulled down, especially on the everyday donor giving. But the S&P 500 was enough to pull the giving forward in terms of the net dollars. People that gave out of their assets gave a lot. People that gave out of their income were really struggling, is the reality of it. Declines in consumer sentiment are continuing to be a headwind. Now, bequests have shown strength. We're always really nervous to put too much stock in the prediction because it's really kind of a volatile area. It's really there's not enough observations that get tracked through to really be as precise as the IRS data around individual gifts to charities and the recipient side. But that said, we have seen cumulative growth in recent years, 5-year cumulative growth trends in bequests, which are speaking towards we've heard about this intergenerational transfer of wealth. There's enough indicators to show that something's different in the economy, that there's a lot more bequests happening. Can we prove that? No, but it feels like we're in the early days of intergenerational wealth transfer. So it's highly variable, but it is growing. This year was a really big growth year. That could be anomalous. A couple of big, billionaires set up a bequest. It's enough to pull that number. So there's more of an outlier effect. But with the consistent 5-year cumulative growth rates, we're seeing bequests has outpaced overall giving in certainly in 2016 to 2020, but also 21 to 25. The other areas we'd see is foundation giving. Now, technically, the foundation giving was it might look off and the giving from, we'll see a little bit more of that. But look how sustained this growth has been. In many ways, it has followed almost precisely the decline in individual giving has been the increase in foundation giving over that time. And when I say decline, decline as a percent of share. Individual giving's still gone up, but not as much as other areas have. Foundation, more and more are structuring. And so out of your donor advised fund and community foundation would count as foundation giving. I think a lot of this is the donor advised fund effect for sure. But also market growth. When markets go up, the assets in a charitable foundation also go up and they have 5%, they have minimums that they give out of. So the markets have a direct impact on foundations almost more so than any other area. We've seen 15 years of consecutive growth in foundation giving. It's still a very strong part of American philanthropy. Now, corporate giving is an interesting one because of all the groups, it's actually had the record growth in the last 5, 6 years, the highest 5 year growth rate in the wake of record profits. Now, what many would point out is we've had 5 years of such record profits. These companies have gone up so much in wealth. Actually, their giving as a percent has not gone up that much. It's just their profits have gone up so much that it looks like they're having record giving. This is one a lot of people are concerned about the tax bill having some impact on corporate giving specifically, partly because the average is about 1% of corporate profits are given charitably, and that's the new floor in the tax bill is 1%. So those that are well over that, or those that might be more creative of giving 2% this year and zero next year, might still get some tax benefit. Certainly, taxes is not the only reason people give. And in fact, when you survey people, say, "Oh no, taxation doesn't have an impact on my giving." But every time we've had tax policy, we've seen changes in giving. So what people say and versus what they do, I think of the Tax Cuts and Job Act had a 13% decline on mid-level donors because of them moving from itemizers to non-itemizers. We do see impact of tax legislation on giving. So even though the stated purpose of why we have a corporate giving program might not change, it's hard to say that the tax impact won't be there. But we won't know that till 2026. 2025 might be a peak year. We'll see. We'll talk about that more in the trends. When we look at the recipients of who gets the gifts, the three biggest growing groups were education, which is inclusive of higher ed as well as secondary education, and academic medicine is in education, which throws a lot of people off, like the Mayo Clinic or Mass General, which are academic medical centers, would show up in the education sector, where a health system, a hospital, would show in healthcare. So education is a very large segment. It's also the one that's the most relational and the most high net worth driven of all of the sectors. The other that are very high net worth are certainly public society benefit and perhaps the arts and cultural. Arts, environment, and animals, while still the smallest charitable recipient, has been growing rapidly. And I think a couple drivers of that is there are some very affluent donors that give land gifts on the conservation side. That's one portion of it. The other portion is generational. The younger generations have this as a much higher value for them. So we're going to see, I think there's a generational shift where we've seen education declining as a percentage share, even though the numbers keep going way up, because the older generations love education. Millennials and Gen Z rank it at like 5 or 6, where boomers it's like number 2 after religion. Same with Gen X around 3. So we're starting to see a generational shift, as well as there's some wealth on the conservation side. Environment's pretty broad. It will have like a Ducks Unlimited or a Nature Conservancy, as well as a Trust for Public Land or other environmental defense and whatnot. So there's a lot of great organizations in all these sectors. Public society benefits, the one that people usually are most confused by. It does have a lot of the big federated charities, community-based, like your United Ways, but it's also where the national commercial donor advised funds are tracked. So that means your Fidelity Charitable, your Schwab Charitable, your Vanguard, they're in the public society benefit segment. And the growth there, in my mind, is almost entirely DAF growth. People setting up DAFs is what's really pulling that public society benefit. So in some ways, apart from a portion of the environmental being one of the only three that had a 10% growth. It's really been an affluent driven, I think, growth that we've seen in these segments. And when we look at the distribution, it's similar to past years. In fact, this is Over 50 plus years, this has just kind of been notching. When we started, religion was like 75% of giving, and now it's like 23%. So that's been the most remarkable or most notable change, and all the other segments have gotten larger. That doesn't mean religious giving has gone down, it's just not gone up as much as the others. So it's percent of the total pie keeps getting smaller each year. About 2 years ago, human services passed up higher education. This is sort of a post-pandemic effect, and it's solidified its position now. Education was always in the second spot. Human services has climbed up to the second spot, and it's always been a rounding error. It's moved past rounding error where I think it's holding in that second spot. So you can see there's some shifts in that. Religion changes. A lot can be said about that. Maybe I'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit, because here's the relative shifts over the last just 20 years. So 2005 to 2025. Look at that growth in environment and animals. I really believe that's a generational shift that we're starting to see. Public society benefit, as I mentioned, a donor advised fund approach. Human services, really post-pandemic priorities, really towards essential needs. Given two foundations, also donor advised fund effect. Education and health have been having sustained growth in fundamentally how their programs have been growing. In terms of there's almost a haves and have nots within each of these segments. The top 10%, the top 1% of higher ed has really climbed. Similar in health. Also in international affairs, those that were really more private support versus government dependent had bigger growth last year, likely. Some of that's to be proven. Arts and culture had a big drop during the pandemic and climbing up, but religion has not beat inflation for years. It's and one thing that I would note is from business model, all of the other segments have predominantly shifted the when I mentioned this haves and have nots, the top 10 to 25% are pulling up the rest. So, like the bottom two-thirds to three-fourths of some of these sectors might have had declines, but that the top portion has climbed so much, it's pulling the whole group out. So you might be like, I'm in a environment organization. We've had a terrible 2 years. It's the big ones that are pulling it up as a sector. So I just want to be acknowledge that that's a thing. Well, and the way that they pulled that ahead is what we've seen is the top programs in all of these segments have built relational fundraising arms. They've built major gift fundraisers, principal gift fundraisers, high touch, and they've structured their model in terms of their prospect development and donor experience management, their technology, their CRMs, all around how do we, similar to adding first class seats, how do we have a better experience for our high net worth donors? The ones that have really built programs around the wealthy donors have seen that growth. Religion is probably the one that's had the least buildup of relational fundraising programs. It's mostly still corporate asks, it's offerings, it's direct response, kind of monthly giving types of things, and those have been flat to declining for decades now. So I think that's a big part of it. It's business model. The other aspect is back in the 50s and 60s, religious denominations had their own international affairs arm. They had their own schools that were part of the denomination. A lot of these have pulled separated from the denomination. So the giving to the denomination in the houses of worship is here, but now a faith-based international affairs is going to show up in this segment. They've also been fractured. So I think that just the truth behind the numbers, we're seeing growth really in giving, but how it's distributed follows business model, mainly around relational, and a little bit of how organizations have developed in these different segments. So, in terms of current dollars, it looks like what a nightmare for foundations, but the next slide is going to explain it. It was a down year for foundations in terms of the recipient of gifts. So meanwhile, I said public society benefit, which is donor advised fund foundations is the other big donor advised fund, and the community foundations was down. But I want to wait till the next slide before I focus in on that. In current dollars, all but one sector did in fact grow. This is the actual growth from year after year. Here were the three over 10% I mentioned earlier. And where I want to focus is the foundation giving has look at the pre-pandemic just kind of look at this slope through 2019. We're getting about 40 billion a year in foundations. Suddenly the pandemic happens and we're hitting 60s and 70s consistently with 2 years hitting over 90 billion. And again, this zeroes out. So if you think about it, we had a record year the year before. And then after that record year, people gave another 80 billion to foundations. It's coming off of a record. It's still up on the slope kind of a thing. So I'm personally not concerned about the foundation giving. I'd be more interested, why do we have some big spikes in these other areas, which often has followed market gains and so forth. But foundation giving is still really net effect up. It's actually the third largest year on record for foundation giving. So this slide back here that, oh, foundations tanked. Actually, no, it's the third best year they've ever had. It just was so good last year. The relative change from the year before is down. All right. So I've
Before
talked.
you switch, I'm just going to
Okay,
interrupt you real quick.
please do.
There was a question. Are recipient faith-based charities like Compassion, Child Poverty, Billion Dollar Charity, are they showing up in religion or are they showing up in a different category in this slide or the slide prior?
Yeah, most of those are showing up in a different category. So, like compassion would show up in the international affairs, sponsored children. Same with World Vision, for example. I believe maybe Samaritan's Purse shows up in human services. I'm thinking of it's mostly the topical area, like a Notre Dame is in education, or I'm trying to think of a faith-based institution. I don't know why that's the first one that came to mind. Like a Lutheran college or a small Presbyterian school would show an education. Think of it if it's affiliated with the religion, but it fits in one of these categories of what their mission is, it's going to show in one of those other categories. So really religion is giving to the houses of worship, it's given to the denomination or related federations, like the Jewish Federation would be in the religious category, for example. So yes, it's a really good question. Largely, they're in the category that they're in, which I hope that I think I answered it. All right, I'm gonna leave
Yeah,
it for there.
I
Okay,
think you did too. One more,
okay.
same question, different type. Do university foundations, the nonprofit side of higher ed, live in education or foundations?
I believe they're categorized in education. Now, the gifts from as a source, like let's say if the let's say they're hosting a donor advice fund and that donor wants to give outside of gift to the school, that segment would be on the foundation side. But the foundation itself at the school would be in categorized in higher education. And we're following the IRS classification. So we're not choosing, we're following what the IRS has decided. Since the Giving USA data is pretty predominantly from the IRS e-file data, we get that data and data feed. We do certainly get a lot of data from other panel studies and baselines around religion, since it's not disclosed the same way as other 501(c)(3)s. So which is the trickiest one to prove, but we have some net effect on where the on the from the donor side. But also, I think we also get benefit from Candid and others that track like foundations on trends. So there's a lot of wonderful data providers in the sector. Case has been really wonderful with their data around some of the bequests in education is really well tracked. So Case, Candid, the IRS itself, there's a lot of wonderful, and I know I'm going to miss them. I shouldn't have listed a few because now I'm not going to be able to list them all. But for the most part, that classification is set by the IRS, so we're following that classification.
Perfect. Thank you. Lots more questions are popping up in the Q&A. So we'll certainly save some of those for the end. And then we're happy to also follow up with some of you after this call. So
Perfect. Well, I'm going to
it's
hand it
my
to you, Kate.
turn.
It's all
I
you.
know, I'm excited. So
I
so
talked
we
way too long, and you're like the more interesting one. So this is awesome.
we um we talked about the economy and sort of what's going on globally. We've talked about what Giving USA has found in terms of the trends that we're seeing over the last 20 years. Now, what does it mean for us and how can we be responsive to all of that stuff? So the industry trends is really the space where we wanted to sort of be forward thinking and look at what it is that we can do and how we can think about making sure that we're taking the most advantage of the opportunities available to us through our donors and through the engagement with our communities. So the first slide is actually a connection between the data that you just looked at and the economy. This is a Federal Reserve graph that you have likely seen in the past. And what it's indicating is that as wealth progresses in terms of higher and higher levels, you'll see more and more of the value of the assets be attributed to the business side, stocks, those types of things, as well as actual business. So what we're looking at is actually baby boomer retirements are starting to happen now. And as folks are retiring, you're starting to see a transfer of wealth. You've heard that before. Liquidation, people selling their businesses or merging or restructuring in a way that they can be bought out so that they can retire. Those areas are real areas for opportunity. In fact, Josh actually told me this statistic this morning that the majority of monies that retirees donate start with the first position that they hold after retirement. So we're looking at the opportunity to bring on, recruit new board members for your own boards. And as they retire and become more and more involved in your board, their connection to your organization gets deeper and deeper. And you are looking at the potential for a lot of giving as they sort of near that late stage in their lives. It also kind of is attributed to the planned giving opportunities that we were talking about, those life income gifts that are listed here, but also the bequests that we're starting to see. Because as you age up and you get to the point where you can give a bequest, being able to anticipate what that value is going to be and then make the donation is very important, especially as you're going through a life event such as this. So it's a really interesting way of looking at our boomer population in our constituent body to say, where is the activity happening and how can we get them more and more and more involved as they approach that retirement age. So thinking about that in terms of strategy for your known constituency, we can move on to the next slide where we're thinking about folks who are in portfolio. So we are seeing a very real trend where relationship-driven fundraising and data-informed fundraising, which have been sort of separate in the past, are starting to converge. We don't necessarily need to save the data-driven decision-making, data-driven segmentation for annual giving or sustainer giving. We can actually start to merge that with our relationship-driven giving opportunities, the frontline fundraisers, your mid-level, major, principal, transformational giving levels that are using data to scale. And that has been a really interesting trend as we're more and more familiar with our data, it's easier and easier to see that information in our systems. We can actually see how that information directly supports higher fundraising in the relationship, the one-on-one frontline fundraising space. So with that trend, folks are starting to build entire new structures, organizational structures around what that fundraising needs in order to be successful. We're seeing it in principal gifts and transformational to begin with. It's an investment in what we're thinking of as kind of a pod, a collaborative group that works on the solicitation cycle and the portfolio management of the topmost donors together. Prospect direction, prospect management. We're looking at prospect research being involved in this, as well as donor engagement and the front line. And even the frontline fundraisers, it's not going to be your chief fundraiser who's one-on-one with those topmost donors anymore. It's actually that chief fundraiser working with a number of other fundraisers in order to move that donor along. Bigger teams mean a lot more information can be shared, and that information is really helpful to advance the conversation along. Thinking about how that individual, the donor individual, is reacting to the global environment, what sorts of assets they are starting to accumulate, what sorts of assets they're liquidating. What happens when they have a family foundation and you're working with the entire family? These things are really important when we're thinking about the future of the front line. So approaching those topmost donors in this collaborative space with both data and that relationship is really proving to be successful in a lot of spaces. Moving on from that, we're also thinking about the donor advised funds, right? So where that highest level of giving is focusing their money. We've talked about DAFs 4 or 5 times already today. It continues to be disruptive, right? We have DAF giving everywhere in every part of the sector, and we also are seeing changes in the way the IRS is considering DAFs almost every single year. And in 2025, we had the adoption of the One Big Beautiful Bill. That adoption didn't take effect until 2026. So we saw a surge in folks giving through a DAF in 2025 in order to avoid the new restrictions that are effective as of 2026. So we're seeing now in 2026, 35% deduction cap, and 0.5 AGI floor. So you're starting to see those restrictions come into play. That means you can only give a certain amount of money, a certain percentage of money through a DAF, which meant it was too restrictive for some folks. So we did see a surge in the latter half of 2025 in giving through DAFs for that reason. Next up is the AI disruption. So where we have data that is informing our fundraising that we are starting to invest in, we also have the other side of that. A lot of you have pressure to start adopting an AI methodology internally. And so we're having a lot of conversation about what that means. What is the cost? What is the benefit? Where can I lean in? What are some options for us to get started? How do we get our data in a place where it's ready for AI? So what we have here is a sort of two-headed sword, a double-edged sword. We're looking at AI as a mirror for the data that you already have. It amplifies the data that you already have. Where that data is great and well informed and very solid, your AI is going to make solid decisions and recommendations based on that data. Where you have data gaps, inconsistencies, where you're using fields in your systems inconsistently, that AI is going to amplify some of those gaps. And so some of the preparation that needs to happen is getting your data in order so that you know ahead of time where those gaps are, where you might have data bias, and where you might be needing to provide a little more context or direction to your tools in order to be able to get the answers that you're looking for. AI is changing very rapidly as well, and keeping up with that, especially if you all are just trying to get started, feels really overwhelming. You're thinking about data security, your own data, other data, what data is it even referencing in some cases? You're thinking about your donors' trust in you. That's very, very important. You don't want to erode that trust by using AI tools without being very thoughtful and without having that human oversight. And then, of course, the environmental impact. We don't want to forget about the fact that we have data centers, we have water usage, we have power usage that are all being consumptive here. There's also a CO2 footprint that is part of AI usage. So how do we contradict some of these things that feel very costly, unknown, or destabilizing with this charge to start scaling and using these tools in order to increase efficiency, operationalize differently, and so on? AI does support you with scalability, which means that you can do more with your donor population than you could have without using an AI tool. So your reach is expanded. And when your reach is expanded, you have the opportunity to increase your base. So for those of you who are starting to see a decrease in your base, even with an increase in your topmost donors, you can go back to the base using some scalability techniques with AI tools. Data governance is something that I think I've said 155 times out of my mouth, but it's a practice. Data governance is not a box that you check. It's not saying we have a policy, check, now we can go use AI. It's actually something that is continual, something that gets embedded in your operation. So establishing a data governance practice is really important here. Part of that is keeping the humans in the loop in order to provide internal trust, monitor, and control practices so that you're using AI in a way that is really beneficial for your organization and recognizes the mirror effect, recognizes the fact that some of your data is maybe doesn't have its completeness from years ago, or maybe is missing key variables that might help in the future. The last thing, and this speaks to the environmental impact, is you can use it and start small. So
Very
keeping it small is very important to minimize the impact. And then the last thing on our list in terms of trends, and I'll be brief, is thinking about our capital campaigns in a slightly different way. We're starting to see this trend where it's not about the dollar goal that we put that out there in the universe. It's actually about the mission. It's about campaigns that are built on impact. And our younger donors are very interested in what the impact is anticipated to be before they give. So you have to actually work through the storytelling aspect of, this is where your money is going to go. This is how the benefit is going to actually help. Will you give? Will you support our mission in this way? So thinking about the why, the when, the what, and the how in a way that is packaged as a story is going to be the most impactful for your younger and middle donors. The older donors, those boomers and those folks who are in that transformational space already, react really well to the dollar campaign goal, but our up and coming sort of major and principal gift donors are really focused on impact.
awesome. Well, as we were talking, there's been a wonderful amount of questions coming in, and I'm hoping we can answer some of them. I think we have like 6, 7 minutes, sorry, to answer some of these questions. And, and I guess maybe let's just sort of start top down. I think Kate and I both have it open. It'll be sort of like stump the presenters. We'll just kind of go
Oh,
in
good.
order.
I like it. That's good. Yeah.
Uh, So the first one is about the government giving. Obviously, we don't track the government giving. Um, uh, Kate, did you want to answer that? I saw you clicked on something that said you would like to answer it, but I can try to guess at
Oh,
it. Oh,
I said that you were answering it live, but I think
oh, perfect.
what we are doing, because it's not organized that way, at, as noted, the question is
Obviously,
obviously giving.
Kate's
Oh,
obviously
go ahead.
Kate's the more technically minded of the two of us. She, so the government giving, do we have a sense what that chart would look like? I don't really know because we're not really tracking that. I think it could be inferred. I think that that's data that I would invite a researcher to look at. I do know we've seen certainly many more campaigns that have included the government grants within their campaign goals. Some people really don't like that, but the reality is a lot of places do that, and it's often listed very separately. Here's the portion that's private support. Here's the portion that's granted. And I've seen some campaigns where that can be as much as half, but it's really so uneven and based on business model. I remember some of my international affairs clients. I had one that on average about 22% of their funding was from government support. I had another one that was over 50% of their funding was from government support. So even at the nonprofit level, it's so variable that it's tough for me to give a normative answer, but I think the data could be calculated out there, and certainly maybe some macro analysis. Use AI for good to kind of track what's that percentage on published campaign goals that include that type of support. All right,
Mhm.
Kate, I'll let you pick one to answer, and then I'll answer another one.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm answering this on the fly. Here we go.
All
It's
right.
interesting to see that the team building is happening at the top versus happening at the pipeline development, annual giving and leadership giving stage. Is that is it because there's wealth transfer in play versus getting people in the door through annual giving and leadership giving? Um, the team building aspect, I think, is most notable at the top levels because of the prevalence of your chief fundraiser being the one-on-one with your top donors, and having that actually evolve into expanding more of the rest of the team to be involved in the play. Um, Forever, for years and years, annual giving and leadership giving have relied on our data and our infrastructure in order to scale, because the leadership giving portfolios are very large, and even though they are one-on-one and frontline, they can't get to everybody all the time. So they're having to rely on and have historically had to rely more on technology and support mechanisms in order to make that solicitation and make sure that their reach is already much further. So I think it's not that it is happening here but not there. I think that it is trending to start happening more and more the closer and closer you get to that one-on-one relationship. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Kate. There's like four quick ones in the middle that I'm gonna try to do a rapid fire here. I'm gonna go in reverse order. Mark Ladendorf, who I just shared a webinar mic with not long ago, asked, what's the source of the business asset conversion slide data? That's actually from the Federal Reserve, is where we got that data. And I was first connected to it by Pyro Solutions. Jason Briggs had a webinar and I got it from him and he pointed me to that. So that is the Federal Reserve. And then the question right before Mark's was from Sarah Rodriguez, which actually is one that Mark could have answered. So that it's a coincidence. With this, do you anticipate an increased interest in annuities? I do. The rates are really favorable to charitable gift annuities. I think this is an area we're seeing records in that space. I think it, I just shared that stage with Mark from Caspic. There's some interesting data we've done on life income gifts, as well as they did some partnership with Stelter around charitable gift annuities. And really, we're at the spot where I think it's really kind of a peak time to look at this. And we are anticipating an increase in annuities. Another one's defining what is meant by a foundation. Thank you, Valentine Gelman, for the purpose of this presentation. As a source, it's when the gift came out of a charitable entity. That would be the foundation. As a recipient, it's a little bit different. It'd be a family foundations as well as community foundations. It's a broader segment according to the IRS. I don't know all the categories of what would be considered foundation, although I believe a corporate foundation would be in the corporation category. So most of what you think of as charitable foundations on the recipient side would be clear. On the source side, I think it's really any gift out of a charitable entity. And then the question right before that from Marlena, when it comes to growth and education, how much of that is attributed to higher ed versus K-12? I don't know the direct answer to that. I would invite you to look at the case insights. My assumption based on what I'm seeing is that the growth trends have been more higher education has been pulling it because that's where we're seeing the larger gifts. But there's certainly a volume. Um, and even within secondary education, it's sort of I hate to use the word haves and have not, but there's sort of a K shape within secondary and K to 12 as well, where there's some really strong performers in that space. But I think the trends are probably pulled more by higher education and academic medicine, which is not to be underestimated how prolific that a portion is for attracting the affluent, who often mention education and research as top recipients of their giving. All right, I gave maybe time, Kate, for you to find one that we.
Yes, absolutely. So Diana Forbes asked, do you have any data on the general perception of AI usage in fundraising? Thinking about the trend of the virtual engagement officer. And the answer is yes, sort of. So somebody in the sector named Cherian Koshi has published using AI in nonprofit and fundraising article 2024, did it again in 2025, and it includes a survey of a portion of the donor population. So generally speaking, we can attribute these numbers to a cross section of the giving population. Approximately 31% of donors have said that if they knew that you were approaching them with a virtual engagement officer, an AI bot, that they would be less likely to give. So there's sort of this sentiment of, I still want the human being, and that 31% is pretty low. So that, we're looking at 69% of folks saying it's okay, or indifferent at those types of things. But it's who that 31% is that we can't anticipate. So we can't say it's 31% of our $50 annual giving folks, and that's it, or 31% of our sustainers. It might be 31%, including some of our major and principal gift donors. And so we do need to be careful when we're thinking about using it for leadership giving and that mid-level giving. The virtual engagement officer can expand reach, but it can also um, encourage a portion of potential major and principal gift donors in the future to not give now. And so we do have to be very careful and weigh it. What we recommend is always having human oversight and the human touch following up very quickly after the virtual engagement officer touch if you decide that you want to use a virtual engagement officer in the future.
All right, I will try to rapid fire just a couple more questions, and I think we're out of time then after that. But I'm gonna quickly respond to both Anne Marie and Dusty. Anne Marie asking around the monthly giving being flat and declining for decades, some of that, as well as Dusty talking about how we're getting numbers from FEP. Fundraising Effectiveness Project is one of the sources for donor counts in general. And that would be a good spot to look at. And yes, the numbers are continuing to drop. We have seen some bright spots. Giving Tuesday had some increases, not as much as the dollars increase. So the percentage wise wasn't quite there. There's some wonderful stuff. I'd recommend reading the Generosity Commission report, which digs into that very well, which also speaks to the broader view of generosity, which Chelsea Leans is also asking about. Yes, some of it is giving to non-official paths. We're not tracking that in Giving USA, except in the copy, which is why I do invite people to read the actual book. We have experts speaking about that. GoFundMe, helping giving charitable directly to recipients and so forth is certainly where we're seeing generosity. We're always cautious to say the individual donors aren't generous. They're maybe not giving to registered charities at the same way that they were. I'm sorry that I didn't get to all your questions. We're going to try to send some emails out, and I know there's so much more coming in, so thank you so much for those. I did want to give this opportunity to pitch our next webinar, Michelle and Jeff, from principal to transformational, specifically on that slide when we're talking about how we're building up these teams around transformational gifts. I can think of no better presenters on this than Michelle and Jeff. You don't want to miss this. I think it's so key to how do we adapt to working with the affluent while don't get me wrong, while we still care about the everyday donor and we want to invest in that because we're borrowing from our future if we're not building that program. But the reality is we also have to close those gifts to meet our numbers today. So both of those things are true. And we want to thank you so much for joining us. We've got so much excitement with our merger being together. Kate and I just feel like we had this kind of a thing out, maybe saw it on the social webs about this pairing, like peanut butter and jelly or Han Solo and Chewbacca. I feel like maybe we're a pairing, but we're just emerging. So hopefully we have many more opportunities. Again, those are links to our QR codes. Feel free to connect with us, but also go to that BWF Zuri combined link because we would love to have you following our content at BWF Zuri. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate you. And
Oh, thank you. It's so much fun.
oh, awesome. All right. Bye for now. We'll see you all next time.
Bye, guys. Thank you.